what does Bill Belichick's legacy end up being if this is it? Let's forget about where he might go next and, if he's going to coach for another 5, 10, 2 years, whatever. This is the end. The dynasty is now officially over in New England. Every part of it except for Robert Kraft is now departed. The quarterback's gone. The coach is gone. We're moving in a new direction. We have a succession plan, which we'll get to. But now, what does Bill Belichick's legacy look like given the way this thing is unraveled towards the end?
It doesn't help, for sure. You're gonna have trouble finding anyone who's a bigger Bill Belichick fan than myself. I think the notion and idea that he was lifted and carried by Tom Brady is one of the more preposterous ideas in the history of professional organized sports. Tom Brady was not even very good for the first Super Bowl. The defenses have been elite every step of the way. Even this year, talent-wise, on paper, I don't know, bottom 10 roster on defense, especially once you lose Christian Gonzalez and Matthew Judon, and they still were phenomenal on defense for pretty much the entire year. To me, it doesn't help for sure, but it doesn't tarnish the legacy. He is both the greatest coach and the greatest personnel person in the history of this sport, and it'll take a lot for me to think otherwise. Maybe Ozzie Newsome can challenge him in the personnel part of it, but coaching, I think it is not even a debate.
Yeah, I think everything has gone badly for Bill Belichick's legacy since Tom Brady departed. Everyone sort of treated that as, oh, this is great. Now we get some A/B testing of who was most important. And Brady goes and wins the Super Bowl immediately somewhere else. And Belichick has sort of presided over the steady decline of the New England Patriots to the point where they're now moving in a different direction and saying, thanks, Bill, but your time is done. We no longer even have the confidence that you're the guy to piece this back together. So from that perspective, it looks bad for Belichick, and you get people now bringing up what his career win-loss record looks like minus Tom Brady, and that also looks bad for Belichick. But as with all these discussions, it's never that simple, and it always loses an awful lot of nuance and information when you simply look at it in black and white terms. You're right. You have to remember that Tom Brady was not particularly good at the start of his Patriots career. Now, he tended to be clutch, and that was an important part of it. And he made just enough big plays at the big times. But you're right, that was a team that was carried by the defense, of which Bill Belichick was in charge. It's also probably worth pointing out that if Brady was able to go from not very good to the best quarterback in the NFL, which he was for multiple stretches or multiple seasons, you have to think Belichick was a part of that, and not just by, implication, but we do have stories from all sorts of people of, Belichick would be in on the tape sessions with Tom Brady, and he was a part of the learning process. Sure, he ran the defense, but it's not like he just left Tom Brady to the offensive coaches and that was it. Like, he was part of his development. So I think you have to give Belichick some credit for the player that Tom Brady became, as opposed to, well, he made one call, he went with Brady over Bledsoe, and then he got lucky, and then he just stumbled into the greatest quarterback of all time. I think you have to assume that he played at least some part in building the greatest quarterback of all time, which has to play into his legacy in addition to being, I think clearly the best defensive coach of all time.
And I think you can bolster that with other situations where he backs up. He always talks about he likes guys learning on both sides of the football. And like Brian Daboll was a defensive coach before going on offense. And again, like Joe Judge and Matt Patricia, maybe it didn't work out too well. But He clearly is very keen on cross-training and learning the game backwards and all these different things. I mean, this is a random tangent, but Bobby Slowick's now an OC. His dad was defensive coordinator forever. He was coaching on defense in Washington on the infamous 2013 staff. I think Belichick has always put a lot of emphasis and value in that. And so it certainly does help the development. And look, I'm not saying he's impervious to criticism and that people are allowed to say whatever they want. He went 11-5 with Matt Castle. He made the playoffs with a rookie Mac Jones, who Mac Jones now looks like an unplayable, non-NFL quarterback. And again, we could probably blame Bill for the lack of development if you want. But the biggest thing is there have been draft misses, no question about it. Has not been good enough recently. But to sustain, I think it's the last piece. Even if you have an elite quarterback, to sustain a dynasty for as long as they did, ignoring rings, just look at making the playoffs or winning your division or making the AFC Championship game, 8 years in a row? The amount of tough decisions they made to trade players away or let players walk in free agency and find replacements and cycle through it, He changes his defense. They were running man coverage the highest rate in the league. They didn't have the personnel for it anymore. He pivoted. He's always changing and adapting. My favorite quote of all time, this is back in like the early 2000s, I think. Someone asked him, like, why are you now running a 4-3 instead of a 3-4? He said, when I started running the 3-4, it was us, the Steelers, and the Raiders. Nobody else ran the 3-4. So when you got to the draft, there were a ton of outside linebackers, and there were a lot of 0-1 tech nose tackles available. But now everyone runs a 3-4. So I'm running the 4-3 because now it's easier to find 4-3 defensive ends and 3 techs, whatever. Like, he made the difficult sound so simple and just always was zigging and zagging, doing all these different things that I know that sounds like it's not a hard thing to do. Yeah, well, people don't do it. So clearly it is hard to do because a lot of coaches cannot do these things. So anyway, I worship the guy. I think that's obvious.
Yeah, I mean, in what is termed a copycat league, Belichick specifically went out of his way not to copy things, right? Went out of his way to, in fact, do the opposite because there's an edge there. Because if you're the one team doing something that nobody else is doing, you have that increased pool. Like, nobody's looking for these players, so I can get them. I know what I can do. I can put them in roles to succeed. I don't have to ask them to do the things they can't do, and we end up better because of it. I mean, I think that's absolutely a huge part of his legacy. It's always a really difficult thing when you get to the end of a sort of legend's tenure, wherever it is, right? The divorce is always kind of messy, and it's like, it's difficult to find an exact comp for the Belichick one because a lot of times it reaches a stage where it's clearly done. Like, the coach has lost something. It's not working the way it used to. I mean, any sort of soccer fans, Arsene Wenger, towards the end of his Arsenal career, it's like it wasn't working anymore. And sure, he was good enough to get them to the Champions League maybe, but he was never going to win a title again. So eventually they had to go, okay, it's time, right? We need to move on from this legend. But Belichick still has teeth. I mean, his defense is still nasty. Like, that part of it is still amazing. It's just the offense has stopped functioning. And part of that is there's no quarterback. So it's not as simple as, well, he clearly just doesn't have it anymore. He does, and maybe he doesn't have all of it. Maybe he's lost bits and pieces. But it's not like Bill Belichick stinks as a coach now, and yet Robert Kraft has reached this point where he's like, I'm going in a different direction. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this is going to come up a couple of times in this show, why couldn't or didn't they trade him?
So Kraft addressed it, and he basically said, someone who's worked with us for 20 years, I felt the same way about Tom Brady as I do about Bill. I just feel like it's not fair. They should be able to dictate the terms of their future, decide where they want to go. And I respect that. I also do think at the same time, because I think it happened with Vrabel as well,
yeah,
I think these coaches also recognize, like, I'm not going to let you hamstring my new team and take away top-end draft capital, because for both guys, I assume the Sean Payton compensation or in that ballpark is probably what you're looking at there. So, first and second round pick. And so they also might say, I'll cause problems or not go or tell them I'm not interested and like stuff like that. So I do think Kraft is being genuine. I'm not saying it's all, we don't have to be cynical. I think it is real. And he probably just says, you know what, it's end of the road for us. Because you just touched on, he even said, someone asked him, did you explore taking away power and just making Bill, and he said, no, I didn't. I don't think it would work that way. It would just be too complicated.
Yeah.
It's been going this way for 25 years. How can I say, okay, now some 35-year-old kid's going to tell you who you should draft, and I just expect you to be okay with that. Like, so I do. I think at a high level, Kraft just says, I have too much respect for them. Let him go where he wants to go, dictate the terms of that decision, and not have to deal with draft compensation, all that. I think it's kind of the same situation that happened in Tennessee. A mutual respect, it didn't work, but and I get why fans can be frustrated. Oh, we could have gotten this cat.
Yeah.
True, yes, but Belichick is above that.
But it does kind of but you would have thought Sean Payton was above that, and yet they were able to make that work. Now, did they just like see the new owners coming and were like, I mean, we can fleece them out of some draft picks? Or like, why did Sean Payton not get that respect?
And so I think not a lack of respect, but he stepped away for a year, right? So
yeah.
He truly did the thing where he said, "I'm just going to stop coaching." The year tolls on his contract, kind of goes through it. It helped get an extension from Denver, all these things, and also, like, I'm not saying Bill doesn't love New England, but I'm sure Sean, to a degree, was like, yeah, I want to help my old team out a little bit, give them some extra juice on the way out the door. But I think that's the big thing, is he chose to stop coaching that team. If Bill doesn't get fired, he's showing up week 1 next year and coaching his team, right?
Yeah.
So I think that is the biggest difference. is Sean said, I'm done here. I've done all I can here. This team, whether they recognize it or not, they don't. This team is cooked. They're not going to be good for the foreseeable future. They've now missed the playoffs, obviously 2 years in a row since he said that and did that, and they probably will for a couple more years going forward. So that I think is the difference.
It's sort of fascinating to me that, we hear all the time that the NFL is a business, it's ruthless and, all this kind of stuff. And yet you get situations like this where multiple teams are clearly leaving something on the table out of respect. And they do it sometimes as well, like, when they sort of do players a favor by letting them hit the market early when they don't need to, that kind of thing. But this is this is a different level. Like, you could get something pretty significant back for Bill Belichick, I would have imagined, or Mike Vrabel, once you have determined we are going in a different direction. It's just kind of crazy to me that now is the time where you go, actually, no, there is room for sentimentality in all this. There is room for feelings, and, we don't have to be business, ruthless the whole way. Only when we're dealing with players. Like, screw those guys. The coaches, though, yeah, they've earned it. They've earned the respect of their own terms. I don't know. It's a bizarre dichotomy to me. I don't quite understand why now is when we draw the line.
Totally 110% fair, and the treatment of players is definitely not on the same level. They're not viewed in the same light, and it's unfortunate. With Tennessee, though, I will say twofold. First, I think they could have traded Derrick Henry at the trade deadline. I think they chose not to out of respect for him. Let him finish his career there. I mean, they handed a guy a microphone and he was talking, giving a sermon for 5 minutes. It was cool. Like, you don't see that often, and I think that really meant a lot and mattered in Tennessee. They're the one where I would more so. Obviously, Belichick is Belichick, but Vrabel's, 30 years younger than Bill Belichick. Probably would have gone for a really substantial, I think, compensation package. I know it hasn't been good for 2 years, but clearly a phenomenal coach. Was great for 4 years before that. And also, though, more so, like, there has been friction since before the season. So them saying, we don't want to waste time, right, not get our candidate, then you should have been having conversations about this in November. And secondfold, I do want to say this. Teams say that, and I get it, and we're not in the, I'm not helping these teams hire coaches and GMs. Not a single team interviewed Mike McDaniel. He was the last guy hired in his cycle, and he is by far the best coach of the cycle. You're not good at it. Like, if you miss 2 weeks and have to talk to some people, maybe you miss out on some coaches, there's no evidence that you're gonna do a worse job, because the hiring process, you hire some search firm who tells you to hire their buddies, collects a paycheck, and that guy gets fired in 2 years. Like, let's be for real.
So the last part of the New England thing we need to talk about is this succession plan that they apparently have had in place. There was talk, obviously, some connections of, well, if Vrabel's available, does Mike Vrabel come in and take over from Bill Belichick? And then it emerged that Jerod Mayo, who has been the player the former player, the coach who's been talked about for a fairly serious amount of time as being an eventual successor to Bill Belichick, isn't just the guy they're going with officially now, but it's been actually contractual for a while. They've had it written into his contract that he is going to be the succession plan, and it's done. It's anointed. He's been the guy. They haven't pivoted. They didn't, go in a different direction when Vrabel was available. They're sticking with the game plan, which was to install Jerod Mayo as Bill Belichick's heir apparent and successor. What do you make of that, first of all, the sort of the codifying of the process, and then let's talk a little bit about what to expect from Mayo?
This is really fascinating. I was not aware that this was something you could do. It has happened before. Jim Mora, and there's another recent example. By recent, I mean like within the last 30 years. Definitely not recent.
Caldwell?
There is some speculation that Josh McDaniels may have had this in his contract as well. After he backed out from the Colts, then maybe this was part of his language there. Which I also, just quick aside, that would have been fascinating if a guy who'd failed as a head coach once, let's say the Raiders thing doesn't happen, he obviously failed twice, but guy that failed in Denver, not a single player has a nice thing to say about him, comes back, the offense looks like it does the last couple of years, and then he just gets handed the job and they avoid the Rooney Rule. That would have been interesting. But I think to a degree, I like the mechanism, because Jerod Mayo probably would have been hired as a head coach elsewhere in the last couple of years. He's viewed as a phenomenal candidate the last couple of years. And it helps teams have stability, pass the torch to a very good, very qualified coach. So I think that piece is interesting because as we're talking about, the defense still has been awesome throughout this entire tenure, even at linebacker specifically, if you want to look at that, what they've been getting out of, Jelani Tavai and all these pieces that did not work elsewhere that come there, they find a role for them and they make it work. I'm assuming Jerod Mayo has a huge part of that working. So it is fascinating, though. I do wonder at a certain point if, it's a loophole around the Rooney Rule that could cause potential problems, I guess, in theory. But in this situation, I think it's a good application, and I think he is deserving. My piece and question to pose to you is, do we think he will also have the same structure and setup as Belichick, where he's like in charge of personnel, or are they going to change that? That's what I don't know, and I find fascinating.
Yeah, you tweeted that out earlier, and I think that's a really interesting aspect of it. Obviously, Bill Belichick was like the czar of the building, and he ran everything. Right now, you're asking a guy in Jerod Mayo who is 37 years old, and his highest sort of position up until this point has been like inside linebackers coach, right? You're now okay, they've been grooming him for this for a while, so it's not like just plucking any random inside linebackers coach and saying, hey, congratulations, you're now running the building. So there's some sort of transition there. But giving a guy like that his sort of first job running a team, giving him total control, which remember is the thing that has scuppered like what seemed like amazing coaching candidates with previous experience of like head coaching gigs. I mean, several of these big name guys have completely run aground because of theoretically the total control, the personnel side as well as the head coaching side. Giving him total control of the entire organization would seem wild to me as like a first experience at the job. It seems crazy if they haven't got, now maybe, I don't know if Ernie Adams or whatever is going to take that side and we say, hey, generally, they've been working together, but Bill, had final say. Now it's going to be more of an even split, but we keep the sort of same people involved. Or if he is just going to get given total control over this thing, I think that would be kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and the thing there so they certainly have been grooming him, and I think the interesting thing there too is going back to McDaniels. When he did return, there was a whole conversation of like, Bill's going to give me more insight into his process. He's like, I think contractually agreed to like tell me more about what he does, get the secret sauce, so to speak. And so I'm guessing there's a possibility that Belichick has also been sharing with Jerod Mayo, like,
right,
all the little intricacies and things he does, and yeah, his trade secrets, so to speak. So it is kind of funny, in a vacuum, just be like, all right, we're going from inside linebackers coach to head coach. You haven't called plays because I think Steve Belichick was calling plays on defense. That's also fascinating. Do you keep Steve Belichick on your staff? Like, I think he's been solid, if he's calling plays. Well, anyway, you obviously have a thought.
Yeah, I mean, so there's that. The whole element of, we look at this coaching cycle, like, well, who's the best coordinator with the best scheme or the guy that's got experience, play call? Like, Mayo has zero of the sort of traditional credentials, if you like, of a head coaching candidate. Has never been a coordinator on either side of the ball, hasn't called plays, has done none of the things that all these other guys are sort of pitching as the reason they should get the job. But from a long time previously, it's been like, no, Mayo is going to be the guy, which essentially is, it's like advertising directly, overtly, that at least a majority of the job description of being head coach, at least in the opinion of the Patriots, is none of the crap that everybody else is searching for, right? And given that they just had Bill Belichick, maybe they know more than you do. And actually just chasing the best coordinator is an idiotic way of approaching this. And we should be looking for different skill sets entirely when we come to hiring head coaches. The other thing that jumped out to me, so I'm very torn on just the process. Like, forget the contractual part, but the idea of anointing a successor, essentially, right? And almost predetermining this for a while. On the one hand, that feels like a very smart, forward-thinking, well-organized way of doing it. Like, let's think about the future. Let's have an organized succession process. Let's, an orderly transition of power. This is how the world works, or should work, right? On the other hand, the couple of times you can think of people doing it previously, it hasn't gone well. I mean, you mentioned Jim Mara taking over from Mike Holmgren in Seattle. That was a disaster. The other one I can think of was Jim Caldwell taking over from Tony Dungy, right, in Indianapolis. Now, Maybe that went better than people actually gave it credit for, and for some reason Caldwell always just seems to get the crappy end of the stick when it comes to how well he's done in the NFL. But minimum, you would say neither of those two instances was a rousing success, and we didn't just, keep the thing going. The train kept on the tracks. Now, it's 2 times, right? Is that just circumstantial? Is that just anecdotal? It crapped out the last 2 times, but it doesn't mean it's a bad idea? Or does it mean that, hey, you probably shouldn't just preordain a guy the next head coach? You actually should go looking and try and find the best candidate.
Yeah, I think the 2 angles there are interesting. First, should we put a lot of stock in the traditional way of going about it when the average coach tenure is 3 years?
Right.
Maybe not. Again, not saying that automatically means that the different approach would be good. But the second piece too, though, I really do think. Look, we'd probably agree. I know it's the kind of consensus opinion of the hashtag analytics community or whatever that you want your head coach to be a great offensive play calling head coach because, again, what we talk about, if he helps the quarterback, he's not going to leave. Whereas look at Mike Vrabel, for example, you lose Matt LaFleur, you lose Arthur Smith. And then, your offense kind of flounders, not just because of that, but, that's always kind of the horror story we tell as to why in an ideal world, Andy Reid is the prototypical ideal. There are plenty of guys that are phenomenal CEOs and leaders of men and guys that can run a building and keep people in line and all those things. John Harbaugh hasn't called plays on either side of the ball in a very long time. And, we can go through. Bill Belichick hasn't either. So I do think sometimes we put too much stock in the status quo when, 25 teams are looking for a new coach every 3 years.